The billionaire pretended to be poor and begged on the streets, but no one cared. So sit down, relax, and let's dig deep to see what happened next. In the bustling heart of Kisonda town, where the smell of roasted maize mingled with the dust of old roads, life moved fast, but compassion moved slow. People rushed past each other every morning, chasing survival, chasing money, chasing dreams, and sometimes chasing nothing at all. But at the corner of Uhuru Street, beneath a flickering streetlight, sat an old man who seemed invisible to the world. His name was Juma. His clothes were tattered, his sandals broken, and his hands trembled as he held out a small rusty cup, whispering for help. No one stopped, not once. For months, Juma begged in the same spot. He had a long white beard, tired eyes, and a voice so weak it cracked when he spoke. Vendors waved him away. Restaurant owners chased him off. Passers-by turned their heads, pretending not to see him. Children laughed at his wrinkled face. But what they didn't know was that this beggar was not poor at all. Old man Juma was one of the richest men in the country, a retired businessman who owned estates, companies, and farms. But after losing his wife and living without children, he grew tired of shallow relationships and fake smiles. He wanted something real. He wanted to find a heart that gave without expecting anything in return. So he disguised himself as a beggar, leaving behind his mansion and wealth, and went to live on the streets of Kisonda to test humanity. After day, he saw greed, he saw indifference, he saw hearts that had grown cold. Until one afternoon, he met Jacob Mwangi. Jacob was only 25, but life had already beaten him like a drum. He lived in a small iron-roofed room at the edge of town, surviving by collecting plastic bottles and selling them to recycling dealers. Every morning he walked barefoot through the alleys with a large sack slung across his shoulder, searching bins, trenches, and dumps for anything that could earn him a few coins. Despite his poverty, Jacob was known for one thing: kindness. He greeted strangers, smiled at children, and often shared what little food he had with others, even when he went to bed hungry. That afternoon, the sun burned hot. Jacob was walking past Uhuru Street with his sack full of bottles when he saw the old beggar being chased away by a restaurant owner. The man shouted angrily, waving a stick, calling him names. The beggar stumbled, dropping his walking stick, and sat by the roadside, clutching his stomach. People stared, whispered, and walked away. Jacob stopped. Something in him refused to move on. He looked down at the few coins in his pocket, just enough to buy himself lunch after a long morning's work. He sighed, his stomach growled, but his heart was louder. He crossed the street, bent down beside the old man, and asked softly, "Are you all right, Baba?" The old man lifted his weary eyes. They were red from dust and hunger. He whispered that he hadn't eaten since the previous day. Jacob didn't hesitate. He ran into the restaurant that had just chased the man away, used his only money to buy a plate of rice and beans, and brought it back. The smell made his own stomach twist, but he smiled as the old man ate, slowly and tearfully. That day, Jacob gave away his meal, his money, and even his time, but he walked away with something far richer: peace. From that day on, a bond silently grew between the two. Every morning, as Jacob passed that corner, he would bring a banana, a piece of bread, or a handful of roasted groundnuts, whatever he could afford, and place it beside the old man. Sometimes he stayed and talked for a while, listening to Juma's old stories about life and wisdom. The townspeople noticed but mocked him. They laughed. Jacob, the bottle boy feeding the beggar, maybe he thinks he's a saint. But Jacob didn't care. To him, kindness was not about who watched, it was about who needed it. The old man, on the other hand, observed Jacob closely. He saw how genuine his heart was, how he never asked for anything in return, how he smiled even when he had nothing, how he believed that goodness was still worth living for. Every word, every act of generosity from Jacob made the old man's faith in humanity grow again. Weeks turned into months. The two became like family, one rich in spirit, the other rich in secret. Then one day, everything changed. It was a rainy afternoon. Thunder rolled across Kisonda's skis. The streets were nearly empty, save for the sound of rain hitting the iron roofs. Jacob hurried toward Uhuru Street, holding a piece of bread wrapped in an old newspaper, food for the old man. But when he reached the corner, the spot was empty. The beggar was gone. Jacob searched the nearby alleys, the bus park, the shops, nothing. He asked vendors, taxi drivers, and street kids. Nobody had seen him. Days he returned, hopping to find the old man sitting there again, smiling weakly, waiting for his meal. But the spot remained empty, silent and cold. Weeks passed. Jacob's routine lost its rhythm, his walks felt lonely, his world felt smaller. He would sometimes stop and stare at that corner, whispering to himself, maybe he moved to another street, maybe he found help, maybe he's okay. But deep down, his heart felt a strange ache, like he had lost someone he never expected to love. Then one cold morning, as Jacob sat outside his tiny house, trying to fix a torn sack, a black car stopped in front of him. The door opened, and a well-dressed man stepped out, holding an envelope. "Are you Mr. Jacob Mwangi?" the man asked politely. Jacob nodded, confused. The stranger handed him the envelope and said, "Please report to Makweli and Sons Law Chambers tomorrow morning. It concerns a will left in your name." Jacob's hands trembled. A will, for him, that made no sense. He had no relatives rich enough to write one. That night he couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to the old man, to his frail hands, his wise eyes, his sudden disappearance. The next morning, Jacob arrived at the law office, a tall glass building that towered above the dusty streets of Kisonda. He hesitated before walking in, feeling out of place in his worn clothes and dusty shoes. Inside, he was led into a quiet room where a man in a grey suit greeted him warmly. On the table lay several documents, a photograph, and a sealed letter. "Mr. Mwangi," the lawyer said, "you have been mentioned as the sole beneficiary in the will of Mr. Juma Baraka." Jacob froze. "Juma, the old beggar." The lawyer continued, "Before he passed away, Mr. Juma instructed that this letter be read only in your presence." He slid the envelope across the table. Jacob opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten note, neat, gentle, and full of emotion. The letter read, "My son Jacob, when you first found me on the street, I was testing the hearts of men. I had lived long enough to see people worship wealth and ignore humanity. So I hid my riches and walked among the poor, hungry, dirty, and forgotten, to see if kindness still lived in this world. You fed me when others chased me away. You smiled when others mocked. You gave your last coin not knowing that the one you fed was once a billionaire. I have no child, no family. Everything I own now belongs to you, not because you pitied me, but because you loved me without reason. Use it to bring light where there is darkness, hope where there is despair, and kindness where there is hate. Juma Baraka." The paper shook in Jacob's hands, his eyes filled with tears. He looked at the photograph that lay on the table. It was him, kneeling beside the old man, handing him food. Someone had taken that picture secretly. The lawyer smiled softly. "Mr. Baraka prepared everything. The properties, bank accounts, and companies have been transferred to your name. You are now the legal heir to all his wealth." Jacob couldn't speak. He sat there in silence, tears rolling down his cheeks. He could whisper he tested me, and I didn't even know. Days later, Jacob was escorted to a massive mansion on the outskirts of town, Baraka Estate. The gates opened to reveal gardens, cars, and buildings he had never imagined. But instead of joy, his heart felt heavy. He wandered through the rooms, touching the furniture, staring at the old photographs on the walls, pictures of Juma when he was young, smiling beside his late wife. Each frame told a story of success and loneliness. In one corner of the mansion was a small locked box. Inside, Jacob found a note and a simple walking stick, the same one the old beggar had used. On the note were 4 words that made him weep again. "Remember the street corner." That night, Jacob knelt beside his bed and prayed, thanking God for the strange way destiny had turned. He promised never to forget where he came from or what kindness had brought him. Months later, Kisonda began to change. Jacob used his newfound wealth not to build mansions or buy expensive cars, but to build people. He opened feeding centers across the town, helping street children and beggars like Juma once was. He started a recycling company, employing the jobless youth who once laughed at him. He built houses for widows, paid school fees for orphans, and provided clean water to poor villages. Every project carried the same name, the Baraka Foundation, Kindness is Wealth. People who had once mocked Jacob now admired him. They called him Mwangi, the miracle man, but he never saw himself as a miracle, only as a messenger of one man's lesson. At the very corner of Uhuru Street, where Juma used to beg, Jacob built a small marble statue of the old man sitting peacefully, holding a bowl in his hands. Beneath it were carved these words: "He tested the world and found one pure heart." Years passed and Jacob's story spread far and wide. Reporters wrote about him. People came from other towns to meet the poor man who inherited a billionaire's fortune, and his life became a beacon of hope for the hopeless. But whenever people asked him what the secret was, Jacob would simply smile and say, "We don't give because we have much. We give because we know what it means to have nothing." So the story ends where it began, on a dusty street corner of Kisonda town. But this time, the street is no longer filled with hungry cries. Children play, vendors laugh, and a foundation truck passes by, serving free meals to anyone in need. Jacob stands there quietly, looking at the statue of Old Man Juma as the sun sets behind it, bathing the town in golden light. He feels a gentle breeze, like a whisper from the heavens, reminding him that kindness never dies, it multiplies. Narrator closing words. Sometimes the richest man in the world is the one who owns nothing but compassion. And sometimes the poorest man is the one who has everything but a heart to give. One simple act of kindness changed Jacob's life forever. And through him, it changed the world. What do you learn from this story?